John Emil List spent his entire life believing that order could solve almost any problem. Rules mattered, discipline mattered, reputation mattered. To those who knew him, he appeared to be the embodiment of responsibility, a quiet, conservative accountant who attended church faithfully, dressed neatly, and rarely displayed emotion. Behind that composed exterior, however, existed a man whose identity depended almost entirely on control. When that control slowly slipped away, he would choose a path so calculated and so devastating that it would become one of the most infamous family murders in American history. On the morning of November 9, 1971, the elegant streets of Westfield, New Jersey looked no different from any other autumn day. Children walked to school beneath trees covered in orange and golden leaves. Commuters boarded trains bound for New York City. Lawns were neatly maintained, and the quiet suburban neighborhood reflected the prosperity for which Westfield had become known. Standing among the well-kept homes was one of the town's most recognizable landmarks. The mansion known as Breeze Knoll dominated its hilltop location with towering chimneys, stained glass windows, ornate woodwork, and nearly 20 rooms spread across 3 stories. It looked more like a historic estate than a family home. To neighbors, it represented wealth, stability, and success. Inside, that illusion was only hours away from collapsing forever. To understand how such a tragedy became possible, investigators would eventually discover that the story had begun decades earlier, long before a single shot was fired. John List was born on September 17, 1925, in Bay City, Michigan, into a conservative German-American family. His parents valued discipline, obedience, and religious devotion above almost everything else. Displays of emotion were uncommon. Personal responsibility was expected, not praised. From childhood, John learned that mistakes reflected weakness and that respect had to be earned through hard work and moral conduct. Those lessons shaped nearly every aspect of his personality. He was quiet, organized, and intensely private. While other children formed close friendships, John preferred routines. Teachers remembered him as intelligent but reserved, a student who rarely drew attention to himself. His faith also became central to his identity. Lutheran teachings about duty, accountability, and salvation resonated deeply with his structured way of thinking. When World War II interrupted American life, John enlisted in the United States Army, serving as a laboratory technician. Military service reinforced habits he already possessed. Procedures were followed precisely, orders were obeyed. Structure brought certainty in an uncertain world. After the war, he returned determined to build what many Americans of his generation considered the ideal life. He earned degrees in business administration and accounting, fields that suited his methodical mind. Numbers offered predictability. Financial records followed rules that people often ignored. Accounting became more than a profession. It reflected the orderly life he wanted to create. In the early 1950s, John married Helen Clarkson, a widow with a young daughter named Patricia. Together, they later welcomed 3 more children, John Frederick, Robert, and Helen. From the outside, they appeared to represent the American dream. John worked as an accountant for several respected companies. The family attended church regularly. Their children were enrolled in good schools. Friends described them as respectable, conservative, and deeply religious. As John's career progressed, so did his ambitions. In 1965, the family moved into Breeze Knoll in Westfield. The mansion was magnificent, but it came with enormous expenses. Heating the aging house during New Jersey winters cost a fortune. Property taxes remained high. Repairs seemed endless. Still, John believed the home reflected the status his family deserved. Maintaining appearances became almost as important as maintaining the family's finances. But appearances can hide enormous pressure. Helen's health had deteriorated over the years. She suffered from complications related to untreated syphilis contracted before her marriage to John. As the illness progressed, it affected both her physical and mental health. Relatives noticed mood swings and increasingly unpredictable behavior. Their marriage became strained, marked by emotional distance rather than affection. John viewed divorce as a violation of his religious beliefs. No matter how unhappy the marriage became, ending it was never an option. Instead, he immersed himself further in work and routine. Then everything changed. John lost his job. For most people, unemployment brings anxiety and uncertainty. For John List, it struck at the core of his identity. His role as provider defined his sense of worth. Without employment, he believed he had failed not only his family but also God. Yet he could not bring himself to admit the truth. Rather than telling his wife or children, he created an elaborate deception. Each weekday morning, he dressed in business clothes, packed his briefcase, and left the house as though heading to the office. Instead of working, he spent his days searching for employment, sitting in train stations, visiting libraries, or simply passing the hours until it was time to return home. The performance continued for months. Meanwhile, the family's savings steadily disappeared. Mortgage payments fell behind. Credit cards reached their limits. Collectors began calling. John quietly withdrew money from his mother's accounts to cover essential expenses. He reduced household costs wherever possible while desperately hoping another accounting position would appear. None did. The financial situation worsened with every passing week. Eventually, foreclosure became a very real possibility. The thought of losing Breeze Knoll terrified him, not because of the building itself, but because of what it represented: public humiliation, failure, shame. In John's rigid worldview, financial collapse wasn't simply unfortunate, it was moral failure. He believed he had betrayed his responsibilities as husband, father, and Christian provider. Instead of seeking help from relatives or church leaders, he withdrew further into isolation. His religious beliefs also became increasingly distorted. He spent long hours reading scripture, searching for meaning in passages about judgment, suffering, and salvation. According to later psychiatric evaluations and investigators who studied the case, John gradually convinced himself that worldly failure threatened not only his family's future but also their eternal souls. His reasoning became dangerously warped. If poverty destroyed his family, if his children abandoned their faith because of hardship, then perhaps there was another way to save them. That belief did not emerge overnight. It developed gradually as debt, unemployment, pride, and religious obsession intertwined into a single destructive ideology. By the autumn of 1971, John had stopped searching for realistic solutions. Instead, he began preparing for something irreversible. He legally purchased firearms. He acquired ammunition. He studied the family's daily routines with the precision of an accountant balancing a ledger. He knew when each person left the house, when they returned, and when they would be alone. Every detail mattered. Tuesday, November 9th, offered the perfect opportunity. That morning began quietly. After breakfast, the house settled into its normal rhythm. One by one, family members followed their usual schedules, completely unaware that John had already decided none of them would live to see another sunrise. The first victim was his wife, Helen. At some point after the children had left for school, John confronted her inside the house and shot her with a 9mm pistol. The attack was swift. There was little indication of a prolonged struggle. Next, he climbed to the third floor where his 85-year-old mother, Alma, lived. She trusted her son completely. Moments later, another shot echoed through the mansion. She became the second victim. Hours passed. Most family annihilations happen within moments of uncontrollable rage. This one unfolded with chilling patience. John remained inside the house, calmly waiting for each of his children to return home. Around midday, 16-year-old Patricia arrived from school. She entered the mansion believing she was returning to the safety of home. Instead, she became the third victim. Later that afternoon, 15-year-old John Frederick came through the front door. He never had the chance to understand what had happened inside the house before he too was killed. The youngest, 13-year-old Robert, returned from a soccer game later that day. Investigators would later conclude that Robert appeared to have realized something was terribly wrong. Evidence suggested he attempted to flee before he was fatally shot, making him the only family member believed to have tried to escape. By late afternoon, 5 members of the List family were dead. The violence had taken place over several hours, not in a single outburst, but according to a deliberate schedule. Even after the killings ended, John remained remarkably composed. He moved the bodies of his wife and children into the ballroom of the mansion. His mother's body remained upstairs in her bedroom. He cleaned parts of the crime scene. He changed his clothes. Then he began delaying the discovery. He wrote letters to his children's schools explaining they would be absent for several weeks because of a family emergency. He informed his pastor that the family had unexpectedly left town. He canceled newspaper delivery. He stopped the milk service. He lowered the thermostat to conserve energy. Each action bought valuable time. Finally, he placed a lengthy confession beside an open Bible. In the letter, John admitted responsibility for the murders while claiming he believed he had spared his family from spiritual ruin. He wrote that financial collapse would eventually separate them from God, and that by killing them while they still possessed faith, he believed he had preserved their souls. It was a justification that investigators, psychologists, and the public would examine for decades. Before leaving, John switched on the mansion's intercom system and tuned it to a religious radio station. As hymns echoed through the empty halls, he gathered clothing, identification, cash, and essential belongings. He locked the front door behind him. Then he climbed into his car and drove away from Breeze Knoll. No one stopped him. No one suspected what had happened inside the mansion. By nightfall, John List had vanished. Behind him stood a silent house where 5 members of his family lay undiscovered, while the quiet town of Westfield continued its ordinary routines, completely unaware that one of the most meticulously planned family murders in American history had just taken place. John List had planned the murders with extraordinary precision, but he understood that escaping justice would require something just as carefully orchestrated. By the time darkness settled over Westfield on November 9, 1971, he was already miles away from Breeze Knoll. Behind him, the mansion remained sealed. Its doors were locked, the curtains were drawn. Inside, religious music continued to play through the home's intercom system, creating the eerie impression that life still existed within its walls. For the next several days, the illusion held. Neighbors occasionally noticed lights turning on and off through timers John had arranged before leaving. Newspapers no longer accumulated at the front door because deliveries had been canceled. Milk bottles never appeared on the porch. The children's schools had received letters explaining their absence. Even the family's pastor believed they had unexpectedly left town. Nothing immediately suggested that an entire family had disappeared. John had anticipated nearly every question people might ask. After leaving New Jersey, he traveled first to Denver, Colorado, where he abandoned his car at an airport parking lot. Investigators later believed he hoped this would convince authorities that he had boarded an international flight. It was another calculated attempt to mislead anyone trying to trace his movements. Instead of flying overseas, however, he continued traveling across the United States by train and bus, avoiding unnecessary attention. Before long, he disappeared completely. Meanwhile, life in Westfield continued. Days turned into weeks. Teachers grew increasingly concerned about the unexplained absence of the List children. Friends wondered why no one had heard from the family. Neighbors noticed that Breeze Knoll remained unusually quiet. Still, no one imagined what waited inside. Nearly a month after the murders, concern finally reached a point where local authorities decided to conduct a welfare check. On December 7, 1971, police officers approached the massive Victorian mansion. The house appeared undisturbed. There were no broken windows, no obvious signs of forced entry. Everything looked strangely normal. After entering the home, officers immediately sensed something was wrong. The interior was cold and silent. Furniture remained neatly arranged. There were no signs of everyday family life. Instead, the sound of religious music drifted softly through the empty rooms. As officers searched the house, they made a horrifying discovery. Inside the ballroom lay the bodies of Helen, Patricia, John Frederick, and Robert. Each had been carefully positioned. Upstairs, in a bedroom on the 3rd floor, they found Alma List. The condition of the bodies confirmed what investigators feared. The victims had been dead for weeks. The murders had taken place almost a month earlier while the quiet neighborhood carried on unaware. The discovery stunned both investigators and the community. Westfield had long been considered one of New Jersey's safest suburbs. Crimes of this magnitude were almost unheard of. Now, one respected family had been wiped out without a single neighbor realizing it had happened. Detectives immediately began processing the scene. Unlike many homicide investigations, there was remarkably little evidence of chaos. The house was organized. Valuable possessions remained untouched. Nothing suggested robbery. There was no indication that an unknown intruder had forced entry. As investigators examined the mansion, they located the letter John List had left behind. In it, he admitted responsibility for the killings. He explained that he had lost his job, accumulated overwhelming debts, and believed financial ruin would eventually destroy his family's faith. According to his own reasoning, killing them while they still believed in God would spare them from eternal damnation. The letter horrified experienced detectives. It was not the writing of someone claiming temporary insanity or uncontrollable rage. Instead, it reflected deliberate planning and deeply distorted religious beliefs. The confession answered one question. It identified the killer, but it created another. Where was John List? That question immediately became the center of one of the largest manhunts in New Jersey history. State police, federal investigators, and local detectives began reconstructing every known movement John had made before disappearing. Financial records showed that he had carefully closed bank accounts and withdrawn cash shortly before the murders. Investigators discovered he had canceled subscriptions and routine deliveries. He had informed schools that the children would be absent. Every action demonstrated preparation rather than panic. Detectives also learned that John's vehicle had been found abandoned at an airport in Colorado. Initially, authorities considered the possibility that he had fled the country. Airline records, immigration checks, and passport inquiries followed. None produced evidence that he had left the United States. As weeks turned into months, investigators expanded their search. Relatives were interviewed, former employers were contacted. Church communities across the country received notices. Photographs of John List appeared in newspapers nationwide. Tips poured into police departments from nearly every state. Some callers claimed to have seen him working as a cashier. Others believed they had encountered him in churches or office buildings. Each lead required investigation. Almost everyone ended in disappointment. John seemed to have vanished completely. His ability to disappear puzzled law enforcement. Unlike organized criminals, he had no known connections to underground networks. He had no history of violent crime. No record suggested he possessed extraordinary survival skills. Yet somehow he had escaped without leaving a reliable trail. The case soon attracted national media attention. Television reports described the horrifying discovery inside Breeze Knoll. Newspapers across America published photographs of the quiet accountant who had become one of the country's most wanted fugitives. Public fascination continued to grow. People struggled to understand how a devoted churchgoer and father could calmly murder his entire family before disappearing into thin air. Behavioral experts began studying the case. Many identified John List as a classic family annihilator, a person who believes eliminating loved ones is preferable to allowing them to experience perceived disgrace or suffering. Others pointed to his rigid perfectionism. Throughout his life, John had measured personal value through financial success, religious duty, and public respectability. When those foundations collapsed, his thinking became increasingly inflexible. Rather than adapting, he attempted to erase the evidence of failure itself. Despite the intense investigation, months gradually became years. The search slowed, fresh leads became increasingly rare. The nation's attention shifted toward newer crimes. For detectives assigned to the case, however, John List remained unfinished business. Then another chapter closed unexpectedly. In August 1972, less than a year after the murders, Breeze Knoll caught fire under suspicious circumstances. The blaze spread rapidly through the aging Victorian mansion. Although firefighters managed to contain parts of the fire, the structure suffered extensive damage. Investigators suspected arson, but no one was ever charged. The fire effectively ended any possibility of preserving the house as evidence. Eventually, the once grand mansion was demolished. Only memories and one of the darkest crime scenes in New Jersey history remained. Even with the house gone, investigators refused to close the case. John List's photograph remained in police files. His fingerprints stayed in national databases. Every so often, another reported sighting surfaced. Each one revived hope for a brief moment before leading nowhere. By the early 1980s, nearly a decade had passed. Children who had once attended school with the List family had become adults. New residents moved into Westfield with little knowledge of the murders that had once dominated national headlines. For many Americans, John List had become little more than a forgotten name in old newspaper archives. Yet among investigators, one belief never disappeared. They were convinced he was still alive. Unlike many fugitives, John had taken cash, personal documents, and clothing. He had planned his escape in advance. Nothing suggested suicide. Everything pointed toward a man who intended to begin again somewhere else. But if he had succeeded, he would need something more than distance. He would need an entirely new identity. Somewhere in America, detectives believed John List was waking each morning under another name, building another life, attending another church, and convincing everyone around him that he was an ordinary man. For nearly 18 years, that belief remained impossible to prove. Then advances in forensic art, combined with a nationally televised appeal, would accomplish what thousands of interviews, countless investigations, and years of searching had failed to do. The man who had disappeared without a trace was about to be recognized by someone who never imagined they had been living beside one of America's most wanted fugitives. For nearly 18 years, John List ceased to exist. At least that was how it appeared on paper. The man whose photograph had once filled newspapers across the United States vanished so completely that many investigators believed he must have died. Yet while detectives chased fading leads and old tips, John was quietly constructing a second life, one built with the same patience and discipline that had characterized the planning of his escape. Somewhere along the way, he adopted a new identity. He became Robert Peter Clark. The name belonged to a former college classmate. Authorities would later determine that List had used enough authentic personal information to establish himself without immediately attracting suspicion. It was a calculated choice, allowing him to blend into ordinary American life rather than living on society's margins. He settled first in Virginia before eventually relocating to Colorado. Just as he had done before the murders, he sought employment in accounting. His experience and professional manner helped him secure work without drawing attention. Colleagues saw a quiet, dependable man who preferred routine over conversation. He was punctual, conservative, and remarkably private. Nothing about his behavior suggested he was one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives. His habits changed very little. He attended church faithfully, he dressed neatly, he avoided unnecessary attention, he rarely discussed his past. To acquaintances, Robert Clark seemed reserved but trustworthy. The years passed with astonishing normality. While the List murders slowly faded from public memory, the man responsible was rebuilding a life that looked remarkably similar to the one he had left behind. Eventually, he met a woman named Dolores Miller. The two developed a relationship through church and later married. To Dolores, Robert Clark appeared to be exactly what he presented himself as, a polite religious widower who valued stability and faith. There was no indication that he had once lived under another name or that he had murdered 5 members of his family. Friends described the couple as quiet and respectable. Neighbors knew him as a courteous man who maintained his property and attended church regularly. The disguise was not merely physical, it was social. John List understood that consistency made people comfortable. He avoided dramatic stories, unnecessary risks, and extravagant behavior. Instead, he lived so ordinarily that almost no one questioned him. Meanwhile, the investigation never officially stopped. Detectives periodically reviewed the case, hoping advances in technology or fresh information might reveal where John had gone. Fingerprints remained on file, photographs circulated among law enforcement agencies. Every so often, someone claimed to recognize him, but each lead ended in disappointment. As the years stretched on, the likelihood of solving the case appeared to diminish. Then, in the late 1980s, investigators decided to try something different. They turned to forensic sculptor Frank Bender, whose work had earned a reputation for remarkable accuracy. Rather than simply guessing what John List might look like after nearly 2 decades, Bender studied photographs, facial structure, aging patterns, and personality traits. He even considered List's lifestyle, believing that a disciplined, conservative man would probably continue caring for his appearance. The resulting age progression bust was striking. It depicted a man with older features, graying hair, and heavier facial lines, yet the resemblance to the younger John List remained unmistakable. Many investigators believed it was their best chance in years. The bust was featured on the television program America's Most Wanted, which specialized in bringing unsolved cases directly to the public. When the episode aired in May 1989, millions of viewers watched the story of the List family unfold once again. Among those viewers were people who knew Robert Clark. Several immediately noticed the resemblance between the age progression sculpture and the quiet accountant they had come to know. One tip in particular drew investigators' attention. It came from individuals who believed their former neighbor looked almost identical to the man featured on television. Detectives moved quickly. They began examining Robert Clark's background. The more they investigated, the more suspicious the similarities became. His age matched, his occupation matched, his religious habits matched. His timeline contained unexplained gaps that aligned with John List's disappearance. Surveillance followed. Investigators watched him carefully, comparing his appearance to historical photographs and gathering additional evidence. Eventually, they concluded they had found the man they had been searching for since 1971. On June 1, 1989, federal agents arrested Robert Clark outside his workplace in Richmond, Virginia. The arrest unfolded peacefully. There was no attempt to flee, no violent confrontation. When officers informed him that they believed he was John List, he denied the accusation. He insisted they had arrested the wrong person. Even after fingerprint analysis confirmed his identity beyond doubt, he continued denying it for a time. Only when confronted with overwhelming evidence did the truth become undeniable. After nearly 18 years on the run, John List was finally in custody. News of the arrest spread rapidly across the country. For investigators who had spent years pursuing fading leads, it marked the end of one of America's longest-running fugitive investigations. For surviving relatives of the victims, it reopened wounds that had never fully healed. List was extradited to New Jersey to stand trial for the murders of his wife, mother, and 3 children. During the proceedings, prosecutors presented evidence demonstrating the extraordinary level of planning involved. They described his secret unemployment, his mounting financial problems, his purchase of firearms, the letters he had written to delay discovery, his careful efforts to disappear under a new identity. The defense argued that List suffered from severe mental illness at the time of the murders and lacked full responsibility for his actions. Mental health experts testified about his rigid personality, religious beliefs, and deteriorating psychological state. Prosecutors, however, emphasized the methodical nature of the crimes. They argued that every action, from delaying the discovery of the bodies to creating a false identity, demonstrated clear awareness of right and wrong. The jury agreed. In April 1990, John List was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder. He received 5 consecutive life sentences. During interviews after his conviction, List attempted to explain his actions. He maintained that he believed his family would eventually enter heaven because they had died while still holding their Christian faith. He also admitted fearing the humiliation of financial failure and the collapse of the life he had spent decades trying to build. His explanations did little to lessen public outrage. Most observers viewed them as evidence of a profoundly distorted worldview rather than genuine remorse. John List spent the remainder of his life in prison. He remained a reserved inmate, continuing many of the routines that had defined him throughout adulthood. On March 21, 2008, John List died in prison at the age of 82 from complications related to pneumonia. He died exactly where the courts had determined he belonged, behind bars. John List believed he could rewrite his identity and leave the past behind. History proved otherwise. His name is remembered not as that of a devoted father or respected accountant, but as a cautionary example of what can happen when pride, deception, and absolute control replace honesty, humility, and human compassion. The victims he tried to erase are the ones history continues to remember. And that, perhaps, is the final verdict on the legacy of John List. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more carefully researched true crime stories based on verified facts, court records, and official investigations. Until next time, stay informed, stay vigilant, and remember that the most unsettling mysteries are often the ones hidden in plain sight.